We're on a streak, mate.
Yeah, 3 episodes in a row. And ow, me, ow, man. Oh, this house. Oh, ow, sorry. This house has got real bad static electricity. I don't know if it's because of the weather. It seems like once the cold weather came in, like the whole house is live, and I just got a static shock right up my fingernail. It really hurt.
That's oddly specific. Or is your ground not actually grounded and all your electric devices are just YOLOing?
Oh, it could be that. It was on the metal of the Mac keyboard, just so you can picture it.
No, that's worth looking into. I had that before, where it
was actually live.
Well, not live, but in a house where the ground wasn't actually working, when the laptop was charging, and I slid my hand over the aluminum body of the MacBook, it had this tingly,
vibrating.
Yeah.
Yes. Now here's a thing that I wouldn't believe me if I said this, but thankfully there was someone else there. I went to a party in London, me and my other half.
Yeah, I don't believe you.
Yeah, this is back when I had friends, and then we stayed over at the friends, and we woke up both incredibly hungover, and we went to Farringdon Station to catch a train home, and we were just kind of like hungover, and I touched my other half's face, and it did that thing, you described that you run your hand along the MacBook and it did that vibrate-y thing.
Yeah.
Her face was doing it.
Are you sure it wasn't a robot?
But she did it to me, and she could feel the same thing on my face. Now, Farringdon Station is overhead electrically powered, so I think something had just been going very wrong in the station.
Well, that's very
with the power.
Reassuring.
The whole air was charged. Yeah, because I've been at that station a ton before and since, and it's never happened. But that morning, and yeah, given the sort of hangover state, we were both sort of just there, like sort of gently touching each other's faces, going, "What is wrong with the world? The world is broken. This isn't normal,
dude." I can totally feel the electricity on your face.
Yeah, it was such a lovely moment to share with my partner. So, well, yeah, it's another episode of Off the Main Thread. We're still doing it to both of our amazement. We should say this is sponsored by Shopify, in that they let us record it, and they don't ask us to say that, but I'm saying it anyway because it's quite nice of them.
Thank you, Shopify.
Cheers. Let's throw forward, because that seems like a professional thing to do. What are you going to be talking about today?
In this episode, I will talk about architecture and entity component systems and a bit of Rust with Bevy, because it all ties together, and whether we can just throw the DOM away.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I'm going to be talking about some of the TC39 stage 3 proposals, which is always my go-to topic when I can't think of anything else. But I think there's some really interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of movement. So I'm excited for that, because I have not kept up.
Well, I hadn't either. I was quite surprised by some of the things that I read yesterday as I was preparing for the show. But you mentioned on the last show that a conversation between two people on a plane, which was totally normal, but it wound you up. Like, it sounded weird to you, because it was weird. Now, I had the same thing.
You were on a plane?
No. So I was in Arundel, and I like Arundel for 2 reasons. There's a lovely castle there, which I was visiting with a bunch of friends. But also, it has to be the one place in the UK that sounds most like Middle-earth. Right, just its name. I
was going to say, I'm like, can you tell me where this is? Or are we talking about, like, Dungeons and Dragons
It sounds like it, because like, you're on the train and the announcer, like, this train stops at Clapham Junction, East Croydon, Gatwick Airport, Amberley, and Arundel. And it does feel like that is in another dimension. I must journey to Arundel to retrieve the amulet from the castle gift shop, which is where I was going. Anyway, in the castle, there was these tight spiral staircase things, because it's a castle, right? And there was a group in front of us, a separate group. And one guy in the group turned to his mate and he said, "Huh, wouldn't like to fall down these stairs." And I was like, what? Let me get this straight. You wouldn't like to fall down these stairs. Like, when it comes to these stairs, falling down them is just not on your want list, It's and it reminded me of the situation you had, because like I was saying this to my friends and they were like, "Jake, this is a totally normal thing for two humans to say to each other. Just let it go. This isn't a thing. This isn't a bit." But like, I was having...
But logically extrapolating from the sentence that has been said, it implies that they would enjoy falling down any other set of stairs.
Exactly. And I was not prepared to let this go. Like, so just for the rest of the trip, like, for instance, we all walked into this big grand room in the castle and I was like, hey everyone, look, hey, look, hey, look. And then I pointed to a giant sword that was hanging on the wall. I was like, huh. Wouldn't like to get stabbed by that sword. Like, come on, can you imagine? Like, no, I don't like this. Ow! Like,
I wanted the other sword.
Yeah, I mean, even if you offered it for free, I'd say no to being stabbed by that sword. And I carried that on for the rest of the day, and everyone got extremely annoyed with me. I was
gonna ask, have you gotten rid of some friends this way?
Exactly, yeah, that's yeah, that's why I have to have internet friends instead, because the real life ones desert me. For good reason, I'd say.
For very good reason. But I suspect that we should rather talk about the web.
Let's do it. I went first last episode, so logic dictates.
It's my turn, isn't it?
It's your turn, I think.
Well, we can take this, as you may have noticed when I said, what am I going to talk about today? I'm not quite sure which direction we want to take this, and I'm open to all of the directions.
Okay.
But as for a long time, I'm on the internal hunt to figure out how we can make better use of multi-threading on the web.
Yes.
And I started playing around with Bevy, which is the game engine for Rust. Not for this purpose, but it ended up actually playing into this eternal hunt. And because in general, I feel like game developers and game development is a lot of interesting things happening there, and things that I wonder if web development could steal or learn a thing or two.
Well, they are pushing, like, on some platforms 144 frames a second, and that's just the rendering. In the background there's physics and game engine, and has to be delivering at that rate, right? So it sometimes feels silly when you see that kind of graphics, even on a kind of moderate hardware thing like a PlayStation 5, a PlayStation 4, pushing out frames at that rate, and we struggle to move boxes around the screen. I mean, I know it's different, but yeah, I think there is so much we can learn from them.
And there's a topic I want to talk about on another episode, which is that I looked at the original Game Boy and how it worked, and how limited it is, and yet the games they made on that thing, it's just blowing my mind. But in general, I think that's exactly one of the facets of game development that make it interesting, in that they are squeezing every last bit of performance usually out of the devices that they run on, while at the same time rarely can they use a lot of off-the-shelf stuff in at the macro level, because every game has almost its own, UX or UI paradigm. Like, sometimes it's buttons, sometimes it's controller, sometimes it's keyboard and mouse, and often it's all of these at once. You want the same code base to run on a desktop, on the Switch, on your Xbox or your phone. You want to iterate really, really fast because the game industry is really intense, and you have to be able to pivot and change things. And often you have multiple people working on different aspects of the game and want to work independently without breaking each other. And all these goals combined put a lot of constraint on or requirements onto the code and how you write it and how the engine is supposed to be laid out. So I think in general, I always am fascinated when I look at how games are architected. And so Bevy is a game engine in Rust, which is interesting for multiple reasons for me. On the one hand, it is Rust, and I like Rust. And it compiles natively, so you can, as in like you just get a binary out and it runs on macOS, on Windows, on Linux. But it also compiles to WebAssembly using WebGL, WebGL2, or WebGPU. So it uses that WGPU crate that I mentioned on, I think, 2 episodes ago, which basically implements the WebGPU API in Rust, and then in the background dispatches to whatever the operating system has, or straight through, if you're in WebAssembly land, to actual WebGPU, or now also WebGL. So it's interesting that, there is the super low level primitive that this engine is using is an API that I happen to understand, but even if you don't, it is an API that is platform independent, and you could even make use of outside of Bevy. So it's knowledge that you learn that is not tied to the specific game engine, which I always think is a big plus. And in terms of features, it comes with a couple things out of the box, like it can do UI elements, like 2D UI elements and layouts, and those are using Flexbox in Grid, as in CSS. They use the same property names. And
that's fascinating. So, but it's obviously it's got its own implementation of Grid and Flexbox within the.
Yes.
So, do you know what this shows a kind of an industry shift from last time I used to regularly talk to a game developer, which is like over a decade away now. But I was fascinated at that time to hear like how many game UI parts were developed in Flash. Because they were developed in Flash, but then compiled down to whatever the system needed.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, loads of PS1, PS2 stuff, maybe even 3. Like the menu systems were often designed in Flash, and like studios would have their own compilers that would compile it down to whatever code, like to Xbox, PlayStation formats. But yeah, that's fascinating now that has. I mean, I guess because there's so few Flash developers around anymore, but that stuff has shifted onto the web. That's really satisfying.
Well, I find it really interesting because it's this thing where I don't think CSS is perfect or that WebGPU is perfect, but I do like that rather than inventing something that does a lot of things well, specifically the use case that you as the inventor think about or care about. You lean on something that has stood the test of time a little bit, something that has already been, lots of, brain hours have been invested into it. And while it may be a bit quirky or not always convenient, it has proven that it is flexible enough to do all the things or most of the things. And so in that sense, I think it's a really interesting move. Something that they, for example, don't have is the cascade. And I actually currently I miss it a bit because the cascade is, a bit, it's very deeply ingrained in the way I think about these kind of layouts. And so it's a bit weird to not be able to override the text color by adding a class or by changing the text color of a parent element. But you can work around it. But the fact that I can immediately go, okay, I want a menu, and I can just do flex direction column and add a couple of children and the thing then works. It's cool. And I mean, obviously it's cool for me as a web developer, but I like that even if you don't know this, learning it is not engine specific knowledge, but it's actually you're learning parts of another open platform. So you get more bang for the buck for investing the time. So that I thought was really nice, which is not even the core part I want to talk about, but I thought it just makes it really interesting to me. And I'm not sure, I should say, obviously I am not a game developer. I am not even an amateur game developer. I'm interested in it, but whatever I talk about should not be seen as representative of the game industry or anything like that. But I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and the core part of Bevy is an ECS, an entity component system, which is an architecture that I think has seen more popularity recently in game engines. I know Unity now has one. I'm pretty sure Unreal also has one. And that is the thing I wanted to talk about a bit more, because as an architecture, I find it quite interesting. So I guess I should maybe try to do like a brief summary explanation of what it is.
Yes, because I have no idea. So you definitely please start with that.
All right. So ECS, Entity Component System. It consists of entities, components, and systems.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Makes it a really good name. So the terminology, I'm just going to explain how Bevy does it. I think it's fairly representative of how it works everywhere else, but I don't know much about everywhere else. So you have a world, which is basically a container for all your entities, all your components, and all your systems. Mm-hmm. Entities are kind of just that. They're just identifiers. They have no data. They have no behavior. They're basically just a number, so that you can distinguish between entities. And you can attach components to entities. And components are just bundles of data. No code. It's just you have different entities and you can attach little buckets of data to them. And then systems are functions that operate on that world. That sounds really abstract.
Yes, it does.
So I think it gets a bit more interesting when we talk about an example. So for example, let's say I create two entities in my world. I give them a position component, which is, a position X and Y.
Yep.
I give them a sprite component, which contains, let's say, a path to an image file. Mm-hmm. And then you have a function, a system called render, that runs queries against this world. So every system just basically asks questions like, give me all the entities that have a position and a sprite component. And you get back an array or an iterator that gives you the entities and only the entities with those components on them. So this way, the system that renders only cares about entities that have a position and a sprite, and it iterates over them and draws all those images to the screen at the position.
Okay, and
that
so
way,
if you have like a nested component structure, that would be handled by the render function, right? That would handle that the component has children, something, is that?
So that is an interesting question. Usually, it's flat.
Okay.
And you emulate the hierarchy. So in Bevy, for example, you have children components and parent components, which are just the ID of your respective children or your parent. And that way you can now walk up and down the tree. So the actual list of entities, the entities is the population is just a flat collection, an array. But by having basically the ID of your parent or the ID of your children, you can walk up and down the tree and do the corresponding actions that you want to do. And that is, in fact, what Bevy does to do a scene graph where, when you move the parent, all the children have to move as well. So they have a system that propagates the translation, like the 3D transform matrix up and down that tree. So you can move a parent and it automatically propagates down to all the children and the children's children and so on and so forth. But as you can see, the system, the function that does the painting to screen, only cares that you have a sprite in a position. Everything else is on the entities it doesn't know about or care about. So for example, we could also add a new component called velocity and have a system that says, give me all the entities with the position and the velocity, and I will move them per frame according to the velocity. So now we have two systems. One is completely independent of the act of rendering. And the other one is completely independent of how entities move about. It just cares about rendering. And that is kind of the core concept of ECS, that you write these fairly small, self-contained systems that express what kind of components are interested in. And then the ECS takes care of running all these systems, and you get things that are going across screen with a specific velocity.
So hang on, let me sort out the hierarchy of this in my head. So you entities have components? Is that a one-to-one mapping, or does a single entity have many components?
Entity can have as many components as you like.
Right, and then the systems they don't sit within that relationship. They're kind of external. They're just looking at all of the entities and doing.
Yeah, they're part of the world. Yeah. Maybe it's an implementation detail actually, but usually I've seen them as being part of the world, and they're usually run in a user-defined or automatically defined order, and it's often called a query. So they basically query the world of, give me all the entities that have these components, but maybe specifically don't have. It's almost like a SQL query, really,
yeah.
Because you really write, give me all the components that entities with component A and component B, but don't have component C, and where component D has changed since the last frame. All of these things you can usually express, which obviously the job of the actual ECS implementation is to make that fast and to optimize with all these things that you're giving it ahead of time, that it can figure out you only need a small number of entities, like it's a very system that runs fast. But for example, what Bevy does, it automatically figures out which systems are independent and schedules them across your course. So it figures out which systems can run in parallel because they're independent.
Oh, that's neat.
Which I think is fascinating. And this made me think if and how this could work on the web, because you have these super granular systems. These two examples I just gave, the move my entities according to the velocity system and the render my entities on the screen system, one of them is not tied to the UI thread. Right? It's only data that needs to be manipulated. It's really the painting on screen that is main thread bound, unless we're talking off-screen canvas, but let's not.
You would expect the positional changing stuff has to happen before the rendering, because the renderer needs to know where to render it. Is that fair?
Right. I think so. My hunch is that, though, that in most, at least game-like scenarios, you have one rendering system, and most of the other stuff is just data stuff that isn't main thread bound. So all the processing could be parallelized across multiple workers and work on the data. And then only once that is done, you do one main thread bound rendering stack. In fact, the way Bevy does it is that they run all the calculations for the next frame in parallel with the rendering for the current frame. So
that's neat.
They accept a delay of one frame, technically. But it kind of makes sense. It's classic pipelining. So basically the main thread is busy doing its UI work and painting well on all the other cores. Effectively, it's already doing all the non-UI bound computations to prepare the data for the next frame. And I was like, you know what? Considering that these systems are small and often the amount of data in a component that each system needs is very small, I wonder if that is something that workers would be good at, because the big difference from the web to all native platforms is you can't just send the pointer. You can't just work on the same data as the other threads. You have to structured clone and copy and send the response back. There is actually some efforts going on.
We've got the shared array buffer, right? That's the closest thing we have to actually being able to.
But that's bytes, and now you're in right now. You have to. I did write a library once called what was it called? Buffer-backed objects. I think I called it buffer-backed objects, where basically through a proxy, you get normal JavaScript objects, but it's automatically serialized down into an array buffer. So nice. That worked on shared. That would work, but it's not quite the same. You end up, in uncanny valley, and JavaScript just doesn't have good ergonomics yet. I know there's actually some exploration going on in TC39. Maybe you will talk about it. Who knows? But as of now, I wouldn't say that JavaScript is well set up, but it has never stopped me before to not explore JavaScript in this way. And that's actually only one part. This is the part where I thought, ECSs could be interesting for the web as a means to make use of workers, because this whole thing about which of these systems need to run on the main thread kind of becomes automatically analyzable through the means of the query. If the query grabs components that are main thread bound because they have textures or because it issues draw commands, it has to be main thread. If not, it can probably run on a different thread. And I found that really interesting. The other part and this is more towards a contrast to our current landscape of UI framework, is that ECSs are by definition escape hatch by default. And I should probably explain a bit what I mean by that.
Yes.
So
do.
I look at stuff like Preact or React or Angular at the time. I don't know enough about Svelte or Vue, but basically, whenever you write a React component, you do not, by default, you lose access to the underlying backing DOM element unless you explicitly expose it with forward ref, I think. Because if you write your own component, you can get access to the DOM element by using ref.
Yes.
But if you have multiple layers of component boundaries, ref doesn't work unless you explicitly forward it with forward ref.
Yes.
And of course, you could do like a display content span wrapper and then use JavaScript to get a child. Like you can drill through, but it's not, it doesn't feel like it should be used that way. And you can probably break stuff quite easily that way. What I found really interesting is that because ECSs are so flat, as in like there is no hierarchy in the way that data is stored, you can always look at all the other components that are on your entity. So like you don't work necessarily on a component level. You often work in what is called a bundle because you need multiple components to be present. And so you can add multiple components at once in a so-called bundle. So for example, for the sprite component was mentioned earlier, it's probably actually a bundle where, you need a position, you need a size, you need the texture, and you probably also need a mesh and a shader because this is rendered using WebGPU. So it needs to know which triangles should be put where and how do what is the shader code that runs to put the texture on there. And most of the time, you don't care about that. You don't know about that. You just, you create your sprite, you pass in the image and the position, and you're done. It's now on screen. But you can. And I found it quite interesting that I could grab in and actually grab the web GPU mesh data and muck about with it. And everything still worked because it is by default all accessible. And so I was kind of thinking about that, what it would be like on the web where you can provide convenience abstractions by default. The escape hatch of grabbing the underlying primitive is there rather than having to explicitly expose an options object or, forward ref. Like you have to remember to expose a level primitive. By default, the escape hatch is hidden in most frameworks today. With ECS, it seems to be inverted. And I wonder how big of a difference that would make on a database. I don't know if there's any good ECS frameworks for the web. I'm sure there are some, but I found it really interesting to think about because another thing I did is that I wrote a little demo, an example with Bevy just to play around where I wanted to do boids, like birdoids, just the things that fly around and kind of look like they have like a hive mind intelligence, and it looks really nice and swarmy.
Yes.
And I wanted to move the computation for that to the GPU because it's many boids and they all run the same code. It's like it screams GPU rather than CPU.
Yes.
And so because Bevy uses an ECS and it uses ECS for everything, even its own internals, and it uses web GPU, I was able to just grab into the bag of entities that Bevy spawns by default and grab the reference to the web GPU device and add my own compute pipeline and shader code to use the same pipeline setup that Bevy already has to add my own bit of computation to it. And it just integrated cleanly and nicely.
The equivalent of what you were doing there, were you grabbing like a private property that maybe that isn't, like, was it documented? And is it something that, Bevy could change the name or reference or the way of getting that?
Good point. So you can hide implementation details. It's just not by default. And I think that's really nice. So the GPU device is just a GPU device, and web GPU is set up to run different shaders. That's like that's actually, that's more like props to web GPU that it's designed that way. But you can definitely hide entities if you want to, and Bevy does do that.
But this is one they've chosen not to hide, or they haven't chosen to hide.
Yeah, I think they really only do it if it's necessary, if it's in any way delicate. And sometimes it does not work. So for example, when you add your camera, as it's called, to the scene, because that's usually the camera is just an empty object that kind of encodes how to move the world coordinate space. So it feels like you are moving the camera rather than all the objects. But in the end, it's just another transform. But in a 3D world, you have a bit more. You have like your field of view and your depth of field and all that stuff. And you have the frustum, which defines your angle of view and where the clipping planes are. And when you start changing those values after the camera has been created, they do nothing. So there is sometimes situations where changing a component isn't really having effect because that's not how the underlying system is implemented. So it is obviously a bit dependent on how the individual functions are implemented, whether changing a component or grabbing it has a desired effect. But most of the time, especially if you are grabbing through to a standardized piece, like a GPU device, or let's say if it was a file handle or a WebSocket or any of those things, then you have a pretty good understanding of what you're doing could mess with the rest of the system, or if it is a fine or safe thing to do. I just really like that I was able to use the entire architecture of a game engine, which usually sounds overwhelming and like black magic to me. And in this case, it's just code, you know, like it's a nice demystification in my head.
So in that model where you can just kind of go and access the world, how much does that hurt parallelism or the system's ability to run things in parallel? Because it feels like if you can touch everything, then things start having to run in series, right? Because that's the reason shaders work in parallel is because they are only really looking at their own pixel.
Well, so this is a bit, I mean, maybe go too far into Rust, but there's read-only access to components and read-write access to components. So there can only ever be one person that has a read-write reference to any given data object, but there can be as many as you want if it's read-only. And that is expressed in Rust's type system, and as a result in the queries for your system. So if multiple systems want read access to the current position of, I don't know, all my birds on the screen, then all these systems can still run in parallel as long as there hasn't been scheduled a system that also wants to write to it, which is usually where you then explicitly order and say, like, you know, the writing stuff is at the very last stage, where you do update positions is a system that runs by itself at the very end or something, but everything else can be parallelized. With the GPU device, it is actually a read-only reference because WebGPU is internally designed to be accessed from multiple threads. So while I don't think it's actually implemented on the web, the design and the spec very much prescribes that you can send around the web GPU device to multiple workers and they all do their stuff at the same time. And the browser and the operating system take care of making that work without them overwriting each other's state or anything like that.
Nice.
So that in that sense, even in that example, I was not hurting the parallelism. Which again, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and so if your demos, because I saw your demos, you were posting on like Twitter and Mastodon and stuff. Are they runnable in the browser? Is that something we can link to?
Yeah, they're running. That was actually really interesting because I ran it on my computer and I built a little FPS meter. I was like, oh look, it runs at 60, and let's see how many birds I can add until it gets slower. And then I wanted to test it out on the web, compiled it to WebGPU, had to fiddle a bit because WebGPU isn't quite the default in Bevy yet, but it wasn't too hard. And I opened it and it ran at 120 hertz.
Well, because you have a 120 hertz screen, I guess it's just on the MacBook screen. Yeah.
Yeah, but why didn't it do it on native? I haven't quite figured out why it was throttle it as a native binary. I wonder if that's an option for the library that they use to create Windows on Mac OS native or something. I just thought it was really interesting. It's just like, oh, suddenly 120 frames per second.
So what we're saying is the web is better, right? That's yeah.
Yeah, that's really the takeaway from all of this. And yeah, I'm curious. I could see an ECS being interesting to implement in JavaScript, where your entities are just empty objects, and maybe use unique symbols for components, and you can just add all the components to your objects, and that's how you model the entities. I don't know. It would be quite interesting to me if you had a UI framework using this system where you can always access the underlying DOM element or the underlying event listener or all these things. And you often wouldn't, but if you need to, it's there. And I need to look around if that's ever been tried by someone. I'm assuming it must have.
And if it hasn't, then you're it, right? You've got to go create
yeah,
it.
I guess I've now officially volunteered. The other thing I want to talk about, but I think I may just do that on the next episode.
Ooh.
Because, forward teaser. We haven't done that ever in a while. I don't know. So now you have this framework, or not framework, you have this library, Bevy, that, does really high performance rendering, has this optimized system. It integrates on the web with, tap events, pointer events, key events, can go full screen. You can grab all the other web APIs from within your Rust code. Like you could technically do IndexedDB and all those shenanigans. This kind of reminds me a bit of, if you want to take full control, just take WASM, WebGPU, and, WebHID and build your complete own stack from the ground up. And I guess at some point we should talk about, is that worth it? What do you win? What do you lose?
Oh, because there are websites that have done that, right? And quite successfully, and people might not even know which ones they are.
Figma is one of them, right? Like they're just Canvas and WASM, and it feels really good. It looks really good. And the question is, would that have been possible with just, like, let's say the DOM? And what would have been harder? What would have been easier? But yeah, I think considering I've already blabbered on for way too long, I'm just gonna leave it here for this time.
Well, we'll do. Yeah, I'm excited for the next episode to tackle that then, because yes, I've got thoughts and opinions, and yes, there's some sites that do it really well. There's some sites that do it really, really well, and there's some that do it really badly. So we can chat about that.
So my future father-in-law told me recently that his neighbor has started to smartify their home. And I was like, that's interesting. I've recently fallen into the home assistant rabbit hole, which I think it seems like many people are doing.
I am as well.
Now. I'm seeing it popping up more and more. But specifically, I was told that this neighbor has 2 cats, and so they've been buying smart devices around their cat's life. I think a well-known smart device for pets is, for example, the smart cat flap.
I've got one. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get notifications when
do.
your cat's and how are you finding that?
It's great. I'm obsessed with the stats of how often they are out overnight. It's great. It's one of the notifications that I pipe through to my watch, which I normally reserve for only the essential things. But now I just like to know, it's like, ooh, Kimmy has gone out. Ooh, Senna has come back in. I love it. Absolutely love it.
I like that there's this angle of quantified self where it's like, I can tell you exactly the average times my cats go out at night.
Absolutely.
But then what he told me was mind-blowing to me, is that said neighbor also has bought a smart cat litter.
How does that?
And
wow.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that is the kind of conversation you want to deepen, but I had to know. And so I asked, well, what's smart about it? And the first thing sounded not too bad, in that it automatically, I guess robotically, bags up the business
business. That sounds... that's impressive.
I know, right? And I guess the whole point is it doesn't smell, it doesn't distribute the smell for extended periods of times. It's easy for you to grab and take out. And the other part... Well, it sends you notification, so there's something to take out, which seems, I don't know, do I want that notification? It seems a bit weird. But then he told me that this smart cat litter also weighs your cat before and after.
That's amazing. I mean, I want that as a human. I want that on my toilets, right? I want to know. I want those stats. I want to see those stats over time.
And the leaderboard, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You want to check in, and you want to have the leaderboard, and you want to make it, you want to gamify it.
Absolutely.
Achievement unlocked.
Oh,
Crack the 1 pound.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there's my market niche.
Oh, I'm going to have to look into that. My cats normally don't use the litter tray, although they have in the new house for a bit. But, yeah, if it carries on like that, I might need to get this self-bagging
smart litter tray
thing. Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, with the staple bathroom story out the way.
Oh, yeah, very good.
Want a web?
Want a web? I do want a web. So yeah, I want to talk about the stuff in Stage 3 TC39 that hasn't really been picked up by, well, certainly all the browsers. That's only been picked up by one browser so far, and what I'm excited to hear is what you think of them and which ones are best.
Is it Chrome?
No, not which browser's best, which feature's best. Come on.
Oh, but is the one browser that picked it up Chrome?
No, and well, we'll get onto that, but it is not that straightforward, except for the first one, which is a Chrome one, which is iterator helpers, right? Stage 3. And
I do not know exactly what's in it, but the name already makes me happy.
Yeah, it just means all your iterator instances get map filter, take, drop, flat map, reduce to array for each every find. Like the kind of stuff you get on arrays, but you just get them on plain iterators. Well, but then things like take and drop are kind of not on arrays, but are useful for iterators. They are shipped in Chrome, but they're not in Safari or Firefox yet. What's your rating? How are you feeling?
If they actually don't do like the intermediate array allocations, which is the problem with with the array methods, right? Like if you have big old array and you do map filter, map filter, each of these calls will create a new array with the same, well, in the case of filter, with the same size.
You're essentially chaining the values through. So yeah, so
and I'm sure engines do clever stuff, but on an iterator, it is clear that you want to do the streamies.
Yes, so on an array, when you do a dot filter then a dot map, you all the filtering happens, then all the mapping happens. Whereas with iterators, you're creating a chain where the values can get filtered then mapped, and that it's more likely to happen in that way around: filter map, rather than filter all the things, map all the things. But yeah, there's no intermediate array creation.
Is it like all of them is flat map, flatten, all the jazz?
Flat map is there, flat isn't.
Interesting. Well, I guess flat map is the same as flat in this
instance. Exactly.
I like it a lot because I always sometimes I like expressing transformations that way, where you make it as discrete map and filter steps, but at some point you feel a bit bad about all the intermediate arrays. Like often it's not big enough to actually make a difference, but I would just feel better if I didn't.
Oh, it saves you having to create an array from there's that thing where you do the angle brackets ... your iterator, and the only reason you're doing that is because you want to use map and filter and stuff, but now you don't have to. Yeah.
I mean, I immediately now want to ask, and what about async iterators? Is it part of it as well?
Nope, but I think they are, they plan to do it, but it's not in that particular proposal.
Right. Okay.
All right. Moving on. And now, if we were looking for the feature with the coolest name, it's this one. We're not, but Shadow Realm. Oh,
ye oldie Shadow Realm. That's been around for a long old time.
I know, but it is now Stage 3. So for folks who haven't been sort of looking through TC39 for years and years, this lets you create a place to run code. It has its own global and a restricted set of APIs compared to a page.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Shadow Roots, really.
I know. Yeah.
It's like a worker, but without the separate thread, isn't it?
Yes. Very, very similar. So it has it has things like event and event target in there, but it doesn't have access to the DOM. So you would do new Shadow Realm, and then on that you do Shadow Realm .import value. You give it a module ID and an export that you want. That returns a promise, and it gives you the thing from the module. But yeah, as you say, it feels a little bit like a worker, but it is same thread and same process.
So is it a sandboxing primitive?
To a degree, but not, because it is same process. So it is melter spec down. Hang on, Spectre meltdown. Vulnerable. So it's security to a point.
So it's not. Don't use it for running untrusted code.
Well, semi-trusted code, I think, is the thing. Like it's because it's synchronous. It can still lock up everything, right? And it can still. I'm gonna say melter spec down again. It can still attack the mem because it exists in the same process. It can attack things in the same process.
Okay, then let me flip it around. What should you be using this for?
Well, that is where I start to wonder. The explainer mentions Google AMP a lot, which dates when some of this documentation was written. But it does suggest running third-party code in there, but it is with an eye of a third party that you kind of trust. So the values you get back can only be primitives or functions. And if it's functions, the arguments have to be primitives or functions, and it has to return primitives or functions, right? Like that's the only two values that can go around. But yeah,
so you can get a function back, but it is automatically invoked within that other realm. Yes. But it doesn't require structured cloning?
No, because it's only primitives. So it's,
Is an object in primitive?
No, so it's primitive as in string, number, big int, like that kind of stuff. Like
that feels odd.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like I'm looking at this API where it's .import value. You give it a module ID and the export name that you want to get hold of, and I'm like, give me that on workers and give me it with structured clone.
Yeah, and even for Shadowrun, why wouldn't you structured clone this as a It's there.
Yeah, I think there's maybe they're open to expanding it in future, but right now, no.
Maybe. Okay, so we are basically what you're saying is we are both a bit
just
left with a question mark when we would use this.
Yeah, and maybe it's more useful in Nodeland, but I am I want that API on workers now.
I could see untrusted-ish code, like if I wrote something like a JS bin code pen kind of thing, where you can block yourself, that's all good, but you cannot muck with my business logic of the thing that I've written. So in that, maybe that's a use case where it would work, but then again, within the Shadow realm, you do not have a DOM and you cannot expose a DOM, because I doubt that you can just send a reference to like an iframe or something into the Shadow realm.
Like I would consider maybe in a worker, create a shadow realm so the code is running in a place that it can't mess around with IndexedDB.
Yeah.
But then you still have to remember you're running in the same process, so...
So it doesn't come with all the web globals. It's really like a completely blank canvas JavaScript scope.
It's not even that, because it has event target, it has event... It has
which I would consider vanilla JavaScript, but nothing that interacts. Okay. Like it's hermeneutically sealed. You can't really Can you manually expose anything to the Shadow realm? It sounds like you can't because of only primitives.
You can evaluate code into that realm, so you can evaluate code that adds to the global.
But could I expose like a function from the owning scope? Like could I say import like this function from inside the Shadow realm should invoke this function on my end, so I could...
Oh, that's interesting. I think maybe you could, because I think, because functions are allowed, I think functions are allowed as arguments as well. I would have to double check
callbacks almost, and that way I could then, through a lot of duct tape, kind of re-expose local storage if I was so inclined.
I would have to double check that, but...
Seems like we need comlink for Shadow realm now.
Well, yeah, exactly. Get on it. Okay. So I think we're sort of similar opinion there. Is it's like it's
low
interesting.
Excitement, honestly. Which
it may be more important in certain systems.
Yeah, I wonder if it really, like you say, maybe it is really the groundwork for making it more capable in the future. Because I'm assuming this has covered a lot of new ground, and they want to get this slotted in, implemented, so that then adding what we maybe find obvious are then easy additions that can be discussed in isolation rather than discussing the entire thing as a whole all the time.
And part of that might be moving structured cloning from HTML land into JavaScript land.
you are right, because I was wrong. I said structure clone is right there, but like in Specland, it is not. It does not exist in TC39. It exists only in the WG.
Exactly. All right. Next feature. Regular expression pattern modifiers. Here we go. You know those little things you put at the end of regex, like I, to make it case insensitive? You can put those in a sub-expression. So, a part of your regex is case insensitive rather than the whole thing.
Okay.
That's it?
Sure.
Yeah, that's my opinion as well. It's like, yeah, sure, man. Cool. I mean, whatever. I'm
easy.
I'm going to keep the champagne in the fridge when that ships, but like, great. And do you know what? I'll probably use it one day and go, I'm glad this happened.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It could get really confusing because there's, I'm guessing stuff like G, global, doesn't work as a sub.
No, I think it's more
but stuff like M, where usually a dot doesn't capture a new line, but with M it can match a new line.
Exactly.
Yeah, yep. Okay, cool.
That's it.
Well done.
Yeah. All right. Set methods. So on set, you get dot intersection, dot union, difference.
Yes.
Symmetric difference is subset of, is superset of, is disjoint from. Yeah.
Gimme now. Good.
There you go. Yeah, I think my opinion as well. Yeah, I want these. They are shipped in Safari already, and they're behind a flag in Firefox. I know. So this is when you were saying at the first. It's like it seems like Chrome is the furthest behind in this implementation. So
I wonder why. It seems like such an obvious thing. The problem with sets. Well, I say problem. I just now, because I was doing the Bevy stuff where, I build up sets of entities sometimes to figure out which ones do I actually want to process. I used a B-tree set in Rust, which is ordered by the value of the thing that's in there. So if the value type that's in my set has operations like is greater than, you can use a B-tree to store the set where they are stored in order. And when you have that, it is easy to do an intersection because you just iterate through both of them in lockstep. And if one is smaller than the other, you iterate that one. And if they're equal, it's an intersection. You can it's an O of n intersection. In JavaScript, sets are ordered in the sense that the objects are given back to you in the order they are inserted.
Yes.
So if you had, let's say, a set of, well, you can't use numbers, but a set of objects, two sets of objects, there's no easy way in userland to implement intersection except an O of n squared where you iterate over both. Well, I'm assuming n squared, I'm assuming that has is O of n. It's probably faster than that.
Yes.
But you have to basically do loop over one set and check in the other set all the time. And I think under the hood there's probably a better way, but it's not accessible to userland.
Exactly.
And so I'm just quite happy that, because those are common operations, right? You want to join two sets, you want to intersect two sets. It seems like that should just be provided. So I'm surprised that Chrome hasn't.
Well, do you know what? Maybe I'm getting wrong information from Can I Use and the regular places, because this was championed by someone who worked, Sathya, who. Do you remember Sathya? He was
Yeah.
We interviewed him in one of the old HTTP 2 or 3 episodes. And he championed this. So I would be surprised if there wasn't some code sitting in Chromium somewhere. But yeah, I imagine we will get hold of this sometime this year in browsers. All right, next up, temporal or temporal. I'm not quite sure what the best way to pronounce it is. So JavaScript dates are hard work. So the way a date is stored in JavaScript is milliseconds from 1970, right? The Unix epoch. Yes. But in DevTools, when you look at a date, you are shown like a version of it which is in your local time zone. And the methods on it of like get me the day, get me the hour, or whatever, these are your local time zone. There are some other methods on there which get the UTC values, but it's an absolute minefield, right? So
yeah, it's months are one indexed. Like if you say get month, it starts at 1. Get ISO string, which should give you the date in your, what is it called? is it ISO 8661? One of those, the standard string format.
I think months are 0 indexed. I think that was one of the weird bits. That days are 1 indexed and months are 0 indexed, which is stupid. So like January is 0.
Check it right now.
Oh my god, okay, here we go. Right, MDN get month. I wrote get moth just to... Yeah, get month is 0 for January. Anyway, yay.
And I get ISO string, which the name kind of implies. It gives you the date in ISO
UTC.
Yeah, it forces UTC, even though it shouldn't. Yeah. The ISO format can very well handle time zones. So
this is where it's messy, because like if you have an input type date, on that you have dot value as date, and that gives you the selected date midnight UTC, which means that if you look at that date in the console, if you're not on GMT or UTC time, it could be showing the wrong date, right? Like it was very confusing. And it means that you need to make sure, if you're getting the data out of that, you need to get the value of, which gives you the milliseconds from the epoch, or you use the UTC methods. If you use one of the other methods, it's going to be wrong. If you are in GMT, it's going to be right, coincidentally. And then someone else runs your code and it's wrong. Yeah.
Well, England in winter.
England in winter. Well, yeah. What a better place to be. But here's the thing, like Polaris, the component library at Shopify, their date picker returns you a date object, and it's midnight of the date selected in the current time zone, which means it appears great in the console. And if you do get month, get day, you get the right values. But if you did value of, that gives you the milliseconds, and you sent that to the server, you're going to get the wrong stuff back at the other side, right? Like,
that's awful.
Because that's such a whoever coded that they've been bitten by date, right? It's not their fault. It's just hard. Anyway, temporal to the rescue. It lets you create a date object that just has like month and date. It lets you create a time object, which is just a time. Or you can create a date and time, which is just a date and time, like no time zone. And this is great, because it's exactly the amount of data you're selecting. Like month and date is the amount of data you're picking in a date picker. The fact that you end up with an object which represents time and displays, has methods that are associated with time zone is just confusing, because it shouldn't, right? That data isn't there.
And if I have a date-time object from temporal, and I say, okay, and now give me the Unix timestamp of the state in this time zone, does that exist?
If you've got just an object that is representing time, or just an object that's representing a date, you can mash these together to create one that represents both. And then you can add a time zone, which now represents a particular time zone of that time and date. And
then hopefully at some point I can turn it to Unix timestamp, because that's usually the thing you want.
Well, Unix timestamp is supposed to be UTC, right? But you could do it for a particular time zone if you wanted, right? Like,
a Unix timestamp doesn't have a time zone. It's a number of seconds since a point in time. So that's why I'm wondering if because you often with
I see what you mean.
APIs or server communication, that is your ground truth format, where you say, like, if you want to communicate a point in time,
yes,
that's what you send. But I'm assuming they have thought of this. I would be surprised if there isn't a way to then say, okay, I now have a date, time, and a time zone, and now do the fancy math, because my God, you do not want to do the math yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and being able to represent a time as well is great for cases where, because if we organize a time to have a meeting, then that needs to include a time zone, because if we're in different countries, that we're agreeing on a shared point of time. But if you're setting an alarm on your phone, like if you set your alarm to go off at 9 a.m, you don't expect that to change if you get on a plane and travel somewhere else. You don't want to be woken up at 2 a.m, because that's where you've traveled.
Or would you? That's actually, I think, it's a question I asked a couple months ago on Twitter, because I was stumbling over this when summertime ended, where it is technically possible that your alarm time never happen.
Yes. I think that is a fun one to ponder. Is like, what happens if you skip your alarm by, changing the time on your phone, and which might happen automatically by crossing time zones or summertime, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway,
I think so. The temporal stuff sounds like an amazing affordance, similarly to the internationalization stuff about currencies and dates and stuff. And I think that's great. I love that they're doing it heavy lifting.
Yeah, exactly. It's one small part of the platform, but and their docs are great actually in the proposal. I urge folks to have a look. And there are little bits of it in Safari, TP, technical preview, whatever, but nothing else. It's not really being picked up. But I'm really hoping we see some implementations of that this year. All right, what's next up? Oh, JSON modules. Like we talked about this. They're and I wasn't sure whether to put them in this because they're technically in Safari only, but the old assert syntax is in Chrome.
Oh, this is with.
Yeah, so this is
import blah 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 .json with type
JSON. Yeah, exactly. That's it. What do you think?
Sure.
Yeah, that's my opinion as well.
I think JSON specifically was never, especially since top level await is a thing. I can just do await fetch then .json.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing, but the groundwork that the syntax opens up, I think that's where the real payoff comes in.
I think it's something, I'm glad that it's there. I think in most cases, like I would only ever use it for same origin data that I really trust. And I would I'd probably bundle it, in that case.
Yeah.
If I'm getting data from somewhere else, I don't want a failure to fetch that data to break my whole module graph, right? To break the whole script.
Yeah, exactly.
So fair enough. Whatever. Fine. Here's another feature, which I had no idea about this. Import source. So instead of import X from specifier, import source X from specifier. Ooh.
Wait, can you spell that syntax for me?
So import.
Is that a new keyword?
Yeah, it's a new keyword. Import space source as in SOURCE and then X from specifier. So it's just adding that word source after the import, and it
what does that
gives
mean?
You the source code of the thing.
For X?
For specifier.
It gives me the source code.
Gives you the module source code.
The source of the module.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. That's
And when I first saw this, I was like, well, why isn't this like an import, not assertion, an import attribute? And it just so happens that the explainer has a section on this, which is great. Is that, well, when you change the import attribute, that is a different entry in the module graph. You can import the same thing in two different ways and get two different results. Whereas import source, it gives you exactly the same thing. You're just getting the source of it rather than.
So it populates the module graph.
Yes.
It just
so you
doesn't
could
evaluate it.
No. So you can do import source X from specifier with, and you can have import attributes after it, which work as expected. You can get the WASM source or whatever, the JSON source.
Okay. Can I then evaluate that source lazily?
You would just use an import, right? I think part of the idea is like it's aimed at tools which might want to introspect something or modify something before calling a val or whatever.
But then why does it matter that it's in the module graph?
I think purely just because it needs to be in the module graph, so if you import it twice, it's not going to the network twice. So you import source, and then you import not source.
Yeah,
it only goes to the network once.
That could be nice.
I think it's interesting. I don't know if I'd ever use it, but I think interesting tools could be built around this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's you could import source and then turn it into a blob URL to spin up a worker with that file. But then if you have module workers, why would you? You could, as a user, you could run Babel at runtime or something, like do some transpilation.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where I would use it. It's maybe WASM is the better use case, but then again, I keep wondering it is the same as fetch, except for it's in the module graph, and HTTP caching, I would have thought would give you most of the benefits, but maybe I'm missing it. So yeah, don't take my word for it. I should probably read the explainer before I say I don't get it. But yeah, from my current standpoint, I don't know where I would go. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't really know what I'd use it for, but I imagine I will very much enjoy tools that are built using in future.
Yeah, that's probably a nice way to look at it.
All right, next one, decorators and decorator metadata.
Boy.
Technically two proposals, but I think you need them together. And yeah, so
how long is the decorator journey been going on?
I know. So this is a way that you can put at and then the name of a function, and you can put that before a class method, a class field, a class getter, a setter, or a class accessor, which is a new thing, and it can transform that thing in some ways. Interestingly, not functions. But this is only on classes. Class accessor, which is a new thing, is just a getter setter combined. Imagine you had like a getter which just got from a private value and a setter which just set to the private value. That's what an accessor is. But it means you can put a decorator in front of that sort of getter setter combo. So I've been using decorators at Shopify in TypeScript land. These new stage 3 ones. I think they're useful. They're really useful to take a class property and when getter setters happen on it, like to do extra stuff. But it's complicated, right?
I remember that previously you would just like basically return you get passed in the original value, you can return the new values, you can return a wrapper function or something. Yeah. And if I remember correctly, the new ones are a lot more complicated than that.
The whole system seems to have been designed so the decorator can only change that thing. I think previously, if you were modifying the getter setter or the field, you would be given a reference to the class as well. So you could, mess around with the rest of the class. That is no longer the case.
Surely you can still go full JavaScript.
I mean, yes, you could go, but you would need to know which class you're going and getting. And so, that would be a case where the decorators only ever applied to one class.
Yeah, okay. Fair.
Yeah, but you do have this metadata object, which lets you associate data with the class. So you can kind of create side effects that way.
I see.
And which I'm using that for, when a property, like a class field or a class accessor is assigned as reactive, the decorator I have means that it will, it knows when that value changes, it needs to re-render the component, but it also reflects that value to an attribute and then puts that attribute in the observed attributes array with the class. And the only way I can do that last bit is through this metadata object.
Yeah.
Because I can't just go and add to that observed attributes array because I don't have access to the class at that moment. So yeah, it's complicated.
I mean, in general, decorators unlock a great DX. It can be so convenient. I worry sometimes that too much magic is hidden.
Yeah.
But it is a way of almost like meta programming where you could go, just run this callback whenever a certain class property gets changed. But okay, that would be getters or setters. That's a stupid example. But you know what I mean? It can remove a lot of clutter by hiding it in a decorator and just giving it a good name. So I think as far as DX goes, I'm glad if we are getting close to the end of the odyssey that is decorators in JavaScript and stabilize something.
It feels like the most of all of the proposals that I've talked about. I think it's the one that's hardest to understand. There's a lot of timing stuff that's caught me out working on it. But yeah, I'm glad it's there. I mean, I'm using it in TypeScript already, but there's no actual browser support for it, and so I would like that to change. Even if I think it's pretty complicated as a feature in terms of using it. All right, next one, a short one, float 16 array.
Yep, cool.
Yeah, same.
Gotta have that LLM data in JavaScript.
Is exactly, and I imagine that's it. That's what it's aiming for, right? It's just it's similar to. Do we already have float 64 array? We do, don't we?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Yeah. So it's just the lower accuracy version of that. Yeah, sounds good. Last one. Here we go. JSON parse source text access. And this is a fun one, I think. So I think we've
Is this for like replaces?
Kinda. So JSON parse has this second argument, the reviver.
Reviver?
Yeah. So this is where you can map from like the value that's coming in to something else. So
is stringify the one where it's called replacer?
Yes, exactly. Now, and this feature does involve both to an extent. So
wait, if it's called reviver in parse, surely it should be called killer in stringify.
Yeah, there is a sort of like lack in general of symmetrical naming in the JSON API. Like it was like, we've got parse. So all right, so we've got serialize. No, we have stringify in this house. You know, I love it.
Quick side note. You know how JSON stringify has that replacer argument,
yes,
and then the third one is the indent argument.
And stringify, yes,
right.
Yep.
If you want to pretty print it, you do object, comma, null,
and then
because you don't want to replace it, and then usually I do the string 2 spaces,
yes,
or 4 spaces, or tab. I only recently learned that you can just put the number 2 for 2 spaces as the third argument.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
See, that's how I felt. I was like, that's fucking silly. That makes it a lot better.
Oh.
I do wish they had flipped the order. I think
I used this yesterday, you know. I didn't know that. Oh, that's amazing. Oh yeah, no, and this is a classic case where that should have been an option object, right? Which is like you don't want to have to use null to skip over an attribute anyway. But yes, okay. So the use case for this, you've got this reviver which lets you take a value and map it to a different value as your, you know, so you could look into a string and realize that it's like a serialization of a particular thing, and you can
basically allowing you to serialize values that are originally not serializable in JSON.
Exactly. But so the idea here is if the reviver is given a number, like if it's a number in JSON, your reviver is given a number. Now, converting the number in JSON to the number in JavaScript can be lossy. For example, if it is a very big number. So, the reviver's a bit rubbish in that case. So this proposal is that the reviver would also receive the source text of that value.
Yes.
So if it's a massive number in JSON, you would be given the number, sure, which is lossy, but then you would be given a string with the full number, which would allow you to convert it to a big int.
Oh, that's really that way source. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I wasn't sure how much JSON, like the actual JSON standard, specifies how big a numeric value can be, because
it doesn't. Oh, the JSON spec is like just one diagram.
The railway diagrams, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't specify, what kind of number it is. It just specifies the kind of characters that can appear in it.
But the source text that you get is only for this specific property. Like, let's say what is in the JSON is a number, but that it is in fact an offset or an index of another array, and I would love to immediately just look that object up and put that in there.
Oh. I'm not sure. I guess it might depend on the order in which this.
I guess you're not getting access to the half deserialized object in there or something.
Well, I guess the reviver will also run for objects, so you can.
I guess you could build that yourself on top.
Yeah.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
So the other side of it is the stringifier, where you've got the replacer, and you can use. So this is where you're getting values in, you're chucking values out in the replacer, but you can wrap a value in raw JSON.
Of course, and you have to, because if it is a big int in your object, if you just call it to a string, then you're now sending a quoted string in the raw JSON, not just a sequence of numbers. So with raw, you can return a string and tell
just blat it into the object
characters. Can you make it emit invalid JSON?
You cannot. The raw JSON, the thing you pass to raw JSON must be valid JSON.
Oh, that's disappointing. That's probably a good thing, but
Yeah. I thought the same thing as you and looked into the spec and like, no, it guards against that. It has to be, it can be anything that's JSON compatible, but it has to be, valid JSON.
Fascinating. That's quite good.
Yeah, that's shipped in Chrome.
Oh, wow.
It's shipped in Chrome. I didn't know. Yeah, I know. So not anywhere else yet, but that's that.
I think that's a nice quality of life thing. I'm assuming that, the common workaround is just like, you do strings. Go deal with it.
Yeah, I can't think of much utility of it except for big int. Like that seems to be the big use case here.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be other things in future, but yeah, that's the main one. All right, well, there we go. I want you to pick your favesies one. No, let's go one.
Pick my favy. Oh, I should have really paid attention.
Do you want me to, I'll do the rundown. We heard iterator helpers, shadow realm, the regular expression pattern modifiers, the set methods, temporal, JSON modules, import source, decorators, float 16 array, and the JSON parse source text access.
It's probably for me, it's got to be iterator helpers with decorators being the runner-up, even though I haven't used them myself.
That's fair actually. What am I going to pick? I am going to pick the same runner-up decorators, but for number one, I'm going to say temporal. And the reason is, like, the iterator helpers, look, I could polyfill that. It's fine. Whereas temporal is such a big, I mean, you could polyfill it, sure, but it's quite a big thing. And also, I want other APIs on the web to be able to return these temporal values. So like, instead of having value as date on a date input, like I want another getter which just gives me the temporal date time. No, just date.
Yeah, that's fair. I think actually for me it's gone so far that I just don't do date stuff.
That's fair.
Any side project that has dates, I just like, nope, opting out, doing something else.
I might be slightly influenced by looking at that stuff recently, so there might be a sort of recency bias.
Yeah, I can totally understand. No, it's good if we solidify. It's a solid pick. I just, I guess I've just found myself too often recently writing the whole map filters. I find them often quite readable and nice, and so just making that more okay, I look forward to.
Good choice. All right then, we have gone on less than last time, but enough, I think. Enough.
Yeah, I'm tired of us.
Man, I need to go and do some real work, not this.
Thank you, Shopify.
Yeah, definitely should go and do some real work. I suppose they're sponsoring this not only in terms of the cost of the editing and the hosting, but probably just in the time it takes to record this. I should be doing other things.
Forced to
around.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. We're gonna try and keep the streak going.
Yeah.
And until then, I think we just do the thing, which is happy next time.
Happy next time. Bye-bye.
The doorbell did not ring. Watson did not bark.
The thing is, I have a delivery scheduled right now. So I was kind of hoping that I would get my revenge.
The revenge doorbell. I have a dude coming over probably in about 5 minutes because I have a leak in the wall somewhere. When it was raining really heavy last week, suddenly my carpet around the window was wet and there's wet patches on the wall, and it's really fun.
Owning a house. I when it was really windy and rainy, I could hear a tapping on the bedroom ceiling.
Scary.
But this is the thing, like there's no damp patch on it.
It's just your cats clicking and annoying you.
Yeah, well, I haven't even been in the loft yet, so I'm kind of scared to look up there. But I don't know. I think it could have just been creaking because of the high wind rather than rain.
Maybe that's where the dead bodies are hidden, and it's just the maggots. Oh, this is dark. I don't know why I took it to a dark place, but.
Did I ever tell you that I like we used to think there was a body buried in our garden in our old
What?
house because there was a patch of grass that would just grow very differently, and would also, a lot of daisies would grow there. And you know the saying, pushing up the daisies?
Yeah.
That's why. But it
Was
was...
it human shaped? Was it like
Yes,
the outline of a human?
No, not exactly human shaped, but it was like, there's a photo of me laid down in it, and it is, it's that size. It's person sized. And we backed onto a cemetery, you see. So I wonder if they just got lost. I don't know. Maybe if this makes it into the edit, I'll sneak
a picture in.
of the body grass into the show notes.
My dad is a GP back in Germany, and he's retired now, but his practice was next to a cemetery, and I always thought like, well, that's
if things go really badly.
You're right there.
Straight on the phone. Sorry. Yeah, there's another one.
Dr. Surma, new former customer. Yep, we got you covered.
You just have a little conveyor belt out the back just to take it straight there.
Little known fact,
ring a bell.
That's how Factorio was invented.
Oh, amazing.
Ooh, that's a great game idea, actually. Well, I know what I'm building next with Bevy.